Silverhold Castle did not breathe. It stood. That was all it had done for generations, stand against wind, against time, against change. Its stones were too old to remember laughter, and its halls carried footsteps, the way graves carried names, quietly, without warmth. At dawn, mist curled around its towers, like something alive, creeping along the edges before dissolving into nothing. Servants moved through its corridors in silence, their footsteps measured, their voices lowered, as though even sound itself was not welcome here. And at the center of it all lived a man who had become exactly like the place he ruled, Lord Alaric Veyne. He was not cruel. He was not unjust. He was simply distant. There were no outbursts of anger, no moments of joy. Only decisions, commands, and a life shaped entirely by expectation. Those who served him admired his control. Those who knew of him respected his discipline, but no one ever spoke of his heart, because no one had ever seen it. In his private chamber, Alaric stood before a mirror framed in gold that had long since lost its shine. Behind him, two servants worked in silence, fastening the final buttons of his formal coat, smoothing invisible creases, adjusting gloves that already fit perfectly. He did not look at them. He looked only at his reflection. The man staring back was everything the world expected: straight posture, composed expression, eyes steady and unreadable. A man who could command armies, negotiate alliances, and host grand halls filled with power. But there was something missing in that reflection. Not weakness, not fear, something quieter than both, a lack of presence, as though he existed only in what he did, not in what he felt. "The guests have begun arriving, my lord," one servant said softly. Alaric gave a small nod. Nothing more, because tonight, like every other night, would require nothing more. Miles away, where the castle's shadow no longer reached, life moved differently. In a small wooden house tucked between narrow streets, Cerise Vale sat by a window where the glass had long since cracked at the corner. She had not always lived this way. Once, her home had been larger, warmer, filled with voices that carried through open doors and laughter that lingered long after meals ended. But time had taken things. First her father, Baron Vale, whose debts had been heavier than anyone had known. Then their name. Then their place in the world. What remained was quieter, calmer, simpler, harder. Cerise did not complain. She had learned not to. Instead, she adapted. She worked. She endured. She kept moving. But tonight asked something different of her. On the bed behind her lay a dress that did not belong to her life. Soft blue fabric, carefully folded, borrowed, temporary, like everything else. She stared at it for a long moment before finally standing, not because she wanted to go, but because sometimes life did not ask what you wanted. It simply moved forward. The journey to Silverhold felt longer than it was, not because of distance, but because of what waited at the end of it. As the carriage approached the castle gates, Cerise could already see the glow of lanterns lighting the entrance. Shadows of movement danced along the stone walls, figures arriving, voices rising, laughter echoing into the night. When the carriage stopped, she hesitated, just for a moment. Her fingers tightened slightly around the fabric of her dress as she stepped down. Around her, others moved with ease, women draped in gold-threaded gowns, men in coats that carried the weight of wealth and status. Their confidence was effortless. Belonging came naturally to them. For Cerise, it did not. She kept her gaze low, her movements careful, not out of fear, but out of understanding. This was not her world, and she had no intention of pretending otherwise. Inside, the ballroom was overwhelming. It was not just the music, though it filled every corner of the room, rising and falling like waves. It was not just the people, though they moved constantly, their conversations overlapping into something endless. It was everything at once: color, sound, motion, expectation. Cerise stood near the edge of the room, watching it all as though from a distance. Even while standing within it, she could feel the difference immediately. Here, every word mattered, every glance carried meaning, every smile was measured. It was a world built on performance, and she had no role to play. A woman brushed past her, laughter trailing behind like perfume. A man glanced at her briefly, then away, invisible, and yet, somehow, still exposed. The air felt heavier with every passing moment. Her chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from something closer to exhaustion. She had seen enough. Without drawing attention, she stepped back, then turned, and walked away. The moment she stepped into the corridor, everything changed. The music faded. The voices disappeared. All that remained was the soft echo of her own footsteps against stone. She exhaled slowly, not realizing until then that she had been holding her breath. This was better. The walls here did not demand anything from her. They did not watch. They did not judge. They simply existed. And for the first time that night, she felt something close to ease. She walked without direction, following the silence the way one might follow a familiar path in the dark, until she reached a door. Karma plain, karma unremarkable. Slightly open, she paused, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Something about it felt different. After a moment, she pushed it open and stepped inside. Warmth met her first. Firelight, soft and steady, filled the room in a way the rest of the castle did not. The scent of aged wood and parchment lingered in the air. It was a place meant for thinking, for solitude, for truth, and she was not alone. Near the fireplace stood a man she recognized immediately, not from introduction, but from presence. Lord Alaric Veyne. He did not speak at first. He simply looked at her, not with anger, not with surprise, but with something far more unexpected. Interest. For a moment, neither of them moved. Two lives from different worlds, standing in the same quiet space, and something unseen, shifting between them. I needed quiet. Her voice was gentle, steady, not apologetic. It was the kind of honesty that did not ask for permission. Alaric tilted his head slightly, studying her. Most would have bowed by now. Most would have stumbled over apologies. She did neither. Instead, she stepped further into the room, as though the space itself had invited her, and without understanding why, he allowed it. What began as silence slowly turned into words, and those words did not follow the rules either of them were used to. She did not ask about his title. He did not question her presence. Instead, they spoke of things that had no place in grand halls. Karma loneliness. Karma expectation. The quiet weight of being seen only for what you represent, and never for who you are. Time passed without either of them noticing, because for the first time in a long time, they were not performing. They were simply speaking. The fire burned lower, but neither of them noticed. Outside, the distant echo of music faded into nothing, replaced by the quiet breathing of a castle settling into the night. Somewhere far away, a door closed. Somewhere else, footsteps passed. But inside the study, time had become something else entirely. Alaric had hosted hundreds of conversations in his life, political, strategic, necessary. Every word calculated, every silence deliberate. This was none of those things. Here, words came without effort, and silence did not feel empty. It felt full. Cerise leaned slightly back in her chair, her fingers loosely wrapped around a glass she had long forgotten to drink from. The firelight softened her features, catching in the strands of her hair, turning them almost gold. "You listened differently," she said quietly. Alaric frowned slightly, not in offense, but in thought. Differently from what? She met his gaze, steady but calm. From everyone else. That answer should have been simple, but it wasn't, because no one had ever said that to him before. For a moment, Alaric said nothing. Then, slowly, he stood and moved toward the fireplace, resting one hand lightly on the stone above it. "There is a way things are done," he began, his voice quieter now, stripped of authority. "A way things are expected to be." He did not look at her. "Not yet. You were taught early that what you feel is less important than what is required." The fire shifted, sparks rising briefly before fading, and after a while, he continued, "You stop noticing the difference. That was the closest he had ever come to honesty without purpose. Cerise watched him not with pity, not with admiration, but with understanding, and that unsettled him more than anything else. Something shifted then, not suddenly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The distance between them, once defined by status, by place, by expectation, began to fade. Alaric moved back toward his chair, but this time he did not sit as far away. Cerise noticed, but she said nothing, because some changes did not need to be spoken. They only needed to be felt. And this one was. The conversation slowed, not because there was nothing left to say, but because words were no longer necessary. The silence between them changed shape. It was no longer empty space. It was presence. Cerise looked toward the window briefly, where the night stretched endlessly beyond the glass. The stars were faint, softened by drifting clouds. "It's quieter here than anywhere I've been," she murmured. Alaric followed her gaze. Yes. A pause. Too quiet, most would say. She shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "Not too quiet." Her eyes shifted back to him. "Just honest." That word lingered. Honest. As though it belonged there, as though it had been waiting. It happened without warning, or perhaps it had been building all along. Cerise stood slowly, not out of discomfort, but as if drawn by something she did not fully understand. Alaric watched her, his expression unreadable, but no longer distant. She stepped closer to the fireplace, then turned, now closer to him than before, close enough that the space between them carried meaning. Neither spoke, because words, at that moment, would have only made things smaller. And this, whatever this was, felt larger than either of them expected. Alaric stood. Slowly. Deliberately. And not as a lord, not as a man used to control, but as someone stepping into something unknown. He stopped just in front of her, close enough to see the smallest details, the way her breath steadied, the way her eyes held his, without hesitation. There were no expectations here, no obligations, no future spoken into existence, only a moment and a choice. And for the first time in his life, Alaric chose something not because it was required, but because it was real. The castle slept, the world beyond those walls moved on, unaware, but inside that room, something quiet and profound unfolded, not rushed, not reckless, but certain. Two lives, shaped by different paths, meeting in a moment neither had planned, and neither would forget, and though neither of them knew it yet, this night would not remain just a memory. It would become something far more dangerous, something that would follow them long after morning came. The night had grown quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. No music, no footsteps, no voices behind walls, only stillness, the kind of stillness that does not feel empty, but complete. Soft light from dying candles rested against the walls, their flames bending gently as if reluctant to go out. Beyond the tall windows, the sky had begun its slow transformation, though the sun had not yet risen. In that quiet room, time no longer felt like something that moved forward. It felt like something that lingered. Cerise lay awake, not restless, not afraid, but aware. Beside her, Alaric slept more peacefully than he had in years. The tension that usually lived in his expression softened into something almost unrecognizable. Human. She turned her head slightly, watching him in silence, and in that moment, something inside her shifted, not suddenly, but deeply. It would have been easier if the night had meant less, if it had been fleeting. Forgettable. But it wasn't. That was the problem. Cerise closed her eyes briefly, as if that might quiet the thoughts rising within her. But they remained. Clear. Persistent. Dangerous. She knew what this was. Not love, not yet, but something that could become it. And that was exactly why she could not stay, because feelings like this did not exist safely in her world. They demanded things, they changed things, they exposed everything she had spent years learning to protect: her independence, her control, her ability to survive without needing anyone. Slowly, she sat up, careful not to wake him, because the moment he opened his eyes, everything would become harder. She stood, her bare feet meeting the cool floor. The air felt different now, not because the room had changed, but because she had. Her dress lay where she had left it, folded, but no longer untouched by memory. She reached for it slowly, her fingers pausing briefly against the fabric. This was her world. Simple. Certain. Safe. She glanced back at the bed, at him, at everything that represented a life she had never been meant to enter, and for a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it, what it would mean to stay, to be seen, to not walk away. But the thought did not settle, because reality followed it too quickly. The whispers, the expectations, the distance between who he was and who she was allowed to be. Her grip on the dress tightened slightly, and just like that, the moment passed. She dressed quietly, every movement measured, every sound softened, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something deeply. If he woke, she might not leave, and so she moved carefully, tying the final ribbon of her dress with steady hands. When she was done, she stood still for a moment, listening. The room remained silent. He had not stirred. She took a step toward the door, then stopped. Her gaze shifted back one last time, not to memorize him, but to acknowledge what had happened. Something real, something rare, something she was choosing to walk away from, not because it meant nothing, but because it meant too much. The door opened without sound, and closed the same way. No echo, no mark left behind, only absence. Cerise walked through the corridor. She had entered hours before, but now it felt different. Colder. Or a longer. More real. The silence that once comforted her now carried something else. Finality. She did not look back again, because she knew, if she did, she might not keep walking. By the time the castle began to stir, she was already gone. Servants moved through halls, doors opened, morning routines resumed, but none of it mattered, because the one moment that could have changed everything had already slipped through their hands, unnoticed. Alaric woke slowly, not abruptly, not with alarm, but with a strange sense that something was different. For a moment, he did not move. His gaze remained fixed on the ceiling, as though trying to understand something just beyond reach.